Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today here at this PM72 Summit. In this session, I'm going to talk about managing people performance in the Agile teams. So let me share my screen and let's begin. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Anand and I'm the CEO and product owner at Amoeboids. Amoeboids Technologies is a platinum partner on the Atlassian marketplace. We have been in the ecosystem for the past 7 years. More importantly, right since the beginning, our focus has been Atlassian app development. Appraise is a suite of apps that concentrates entirely on extending people management capabilities of Jira and Confluence. This suite of apps are our flagship products on the Atlassian marketplace. Now, although on my screen, you should be looking at the 80% statistic, I want to take a step back and first address one common question that we get, right? So the question is, why are we trying to link or couple a project management system with a performance management system? Even today, the summit is entirely about project management, but still we are talking about performance management, right? Well, the idea is projects are at the end of the day executed by humans. These humans obviously have emotions, they get frustrated, they have aspirations, they have ambitions, they want to upskill, they want to change their career path, and so on and so forth. So there is no way you can manage your projects without taking into account the human component of it. And that is where the performance management aspect comes into the picture, right? That was one aspect of it. The second thing that we need to keep at the back of our mind is the changes that have been happening to the entire ecosystem in the last couple of years. When I say ecosystem, I'm essentially referring to the impact of the pandemic on the knowledge economy, where majority of the companies had switched to a work from home model, and some companies are now trying to get into a hybrid situation where partially sometime their teams are going to be working from the office and rest of the time they are going to be working from a location of their own choice. So if we look at this specific statistic, it says, according to Forbes, almost 80% of the knowledge workers in the US are not managed well. They do not feel encouraged, supported, or motivated to do a good job. 80%, that's quite a high number. Now, again, some additional insights based on a future of work survey that we conducted a couple of months ago. Over 500 HR leaders across different geographies, across different org sizes were involved in this survey. Here, 44% of the respondents said their performance management process has completely changed or evolved since the pandemic began. Over 77% respondents believed in incorporating continuous learning and upskilling into performance evaluation process. And interestingly, 11% reported no changes at all in the performance management process. Now, with these statistics in front of us, let's understand why annual performance reviews do not work, right? So there are a bunch of minute reasons, but we have tried to highlight the ones that we essentially understood to be important based on the future of work survey. First one was the annual reviews are insufficient at providing an accurate assessment of the employee behavior, of the employee performance. The data is not enough to make objective decisions. Right? What I mean here is this is kind of a deceiving statement. Data isn't enough to objectively make decisions. This does not necessarily mean you have not gathered all the relevant data in the span of 1 year, but it means on top of the data that you have gathered, there are some additional elements that have to be taken into account to make objective decisions. We have talked about them in the past. We call them, those biases that get triggered, that get activated, especially in the context of annual performance reviews. Another important aspect is the annual reviews cannot fulfill the employee aspirations, right? The speed of business has increased a lot since the annual performance reviews began. Things are changing pretty rapidly, especially after the internet penetration. The knowledge economy moves extremely fast, and so do the employee aspirations. And that's why the mismatch between the speed of the business against the annual performance reviews cannot fulfill the employee aspirations. At the end of the day, the annual performance reviews traditional system is not an engaging method, and obviously it cannot inspire or motivate individuals for the long run. These are some of the common problems that we have seen across different organizations. That is where the agility comes in. That is what we call the agile performance management. The project management processes have been for quite some time now have been turned into agile processes, right? So especially software development processes have been turned into agile processes. This is an ongoing movement, if I may call it, on the global front, but that is not going hand in hand with the performance management. So what's happening across the globe is the project management processes are becoming more agile, whereas performance management processes are still remaining the traditional ones. Now let's understand, what are we calling this agile performance management? I'll just read out the definition and then I'll quickly talk about the different elements involved. Agile performance management is an ongoing process of communication between all the stakeholders. Let me quickly highlight a couple of things in this statement. Is an ongoing process of communication. We are not talking about a specific periodicity. We are not saying this is happening every quarter, every 6 months, or every year. We are saying this is an ongoing process of communication. Second aspect, between all the stakeholders. In fact, I've mentioned in the brackets, it's not only between the manager and an employee, but between all the stakeholders. So your peers are also your stakeholders, your direct reports are the stakeholders, your customers are also the stakeholders as far as your agile performance management is concerned, right? That occurs throughout the year in support of accomplishing the strategic objectives of the organization. I'll highlight this once again. In support of accomplishing the strategic objectives of the organization. This is not, performance management only at the scale of an individual. This is obviously the individual aspirations have to be taken into account, but at the same time, you have to link the individual performance to the organization's strategic goals, strategic objectives in the long run. The communication process includes clarifying expectations, setting objectives, identifying goals, providing feedback, and reviewing results, right? At the bottom of the screen, you'll see there are some important elements that have been highlighted. Setting goals, defining metrics. Essentially, when I say defining metrics, I'm saying you want to turn those goals, you want to turn those objectives into something more measurable, right? Because even if you look at agile project management, you'll notice there are a bunch of different metrics that are measured to ensure your team is adhering to the best agile project management practices. So the similar practices, the similar metrics should be taken into account when you're trying to implement agile performance management across your teams. So that is where set goals and define metrics comes into picture. Communicating and reviewing. Again, that's an important element of the performance management. It's not just sufficient to look back at the end of the year or at the end of a specific duration. how someone has performed. It has to be on an ongoing basis. People need to be given input surrounding how they can improve looking forward. It's not only about looking backwards, right? And finally, training and upskill. We'll talk about all these aspects in a moment, but I'll let you digest the entire philosophy in this one single slide as far as agile performance management is concerned. Just to repeat, we are trying to draw parallels between agile project management and agile performance management, right? So you cannot go ahead and be successful in implementing agile processes in your project management practices, but at the same time, keep your performance management system traditional. On the next slide, we are comparing the traditional versus the agile performance management methods, right? Let's look at these one by one, right? On the left-hand side, you'll see the traditional performance management, and on the right-hand side, you'll see the agile performance management. Like I have been suggesting right since the beginning of this session, traditionally you're accustomed to having these feedback conversations most likely annually, or if your organization is a bit more progressive, they have been happening quarterly or semi-annually. When it comes to the agile performance management, that philosophy is turned entirely on its head. Now you're not talking about periodic feedback, you're talking about real-time feedback, right? As and when the tasks is completed, maybe the specific project is completed, the feedback is supposed to be real time. You cannot really wait for a specific event to happen or a specific cycle to end. No, the feedback is supposed to be real time. When it comes to goals or objectives, typically, traditionally, performance management considers setting up goals at the beginning of the year, and like it or not, majority of the times they are looked at only at the end of the year. That is again completely opposite in the agile performance management philosophy. You're talking about setting up the goals which are flexible. What that means is you set up the goal at the beginning of the cycle, but then you do not go on and execute on that goal continuously. You always come back, sort of have a quick discussion, quick review along with your peers, along with your teammates, along with your managers, whoever responsible or rather relevant stakeholders are, and say, asking the important question whether this goal is really making sense anymore. If it is not, then it's the time to throw it out of the window and start working on something, start working on a goal that's more relevant to today's needs. So that's where the flexibility comes in. Again, this is following the, if you have looked at these 4 points in the right hand column, you would have realized these are essentially taking some cues from the Agile manifesto, right? Similar to how Agile suggests the team should be open to feedback, the team should be open to making changes in what they are working on. Similarly, the Agile performance management philosophy is saying be flexible in terms of what goals you're trying to achieve. In terms of the third point, we are saying dictation versus collaboration, right? So rather than having a waterfall kind of approach wherein the instructions are coming at the top, here we are talking about collaborating, having a back and forth between different stakeholders, and then finding out what's the most appropriate item that has to be worked on that can give you the desired outcomes. And the final point, traditionally, the performance management has always focused on delivery, whereas Agile performance management is focusing on growth. Now, with these comparison points in mind, I want to talk about 3 important elements as far as the Agile performance management philosophy is concerned. We are going to talk about continuous feedback. We are going to talk about objectives and key results. And we are also going to talk about the traditional performance management one by one. Before we do that, a quick note about how you can introduce agile performance management in your organization. Obviously, these are some of the easier said than done points, but if you go ahead and do a proper change management, it is possible to introduce agile performance management in your organization. You're talking about keeping your goals flexible, increasing the opportunity for collaboration, focusing on growth rather than delivery, incorporating regular conversations amongst different stakeholders, and the most important one, having more of a collaborative leadership, supportive leadership to increase the two-way communication, rather than someone at the top saying this is what we want to achieve. Having a two-way communication amongst different layers of your organization and figuring out what is the best for your entire organization. Coming back to those three important elements, first one is continuous feedback, or feedback in short. Now, what is the purpose of continuous feedback in the framework of agile performance management, right? This type of feedback is supposed to be quick. It cannot be structured or elaborate. It has to be a very quick note of praise, thanks, or even criticism, or may I say discussion about an area of improvement, right? So that's an important element. It has to be quick. It has to be short. If you go ahead and write up an essay, then that's not necessarily going to be short. If you try and do that, then it's not going to be happening as frequently as we want it to, right? So it should not go beyond 4 or 5 sentences, and it should be to the point. It should be impromptu, right? No one has to wait for an year-end, quarter-end, or some outside trigger to provide or request this feedback. It has to be triggered on their own. It has to be contextual, right? The feedback has to be actionable and contextual. It can be related to your day-to-day activities in your project, or it can be related to your mid to short-term goals as well. And this feedback is, again, the last point, which says constructive. It's an important point to understand here. The reason I've highlighted this is supposed to be constructive is because here there is no agenda for the managers, right? They are not supposed to call out whether there is going to be a promotion, there is going to be an increment, whatever, for the direct report. But this is more about development oriented feedback. How can this individual go ahead and progress in his or her career? It is not backward looking or appraisal specific, right? So this is an important element, having the constructive nature of continuous feedback. We'll also talk about the structured feedback. That's the third part. Forms, we are calling it forms. And I'll briefly sort of talk about why it is important to have continuous feedback as well as a more structured and elaborate feedback. But before we do that, let's talk about OKRs, the objectives and key results. OKRs are nothing but, essentially evolution of management by objectives philosophy. Objectives are your goals. Key results are the measurements of success or failure of the corresponding objective. So for example, traditionally, one would have set up a goal such as improve communication skills, right? Now, by and itself, this goal is almost useless to the point because it's subjective. The manager can say X, the direct report can say Y. There cannot be an objective assessment of whether the goal was achieved or it was, failed to achieve. The individual failed to achieve it. Now, contrast that with the agile goal setting methodology, wherein you have the goal that says improve communication skills, but its success or failure is measured based on the key results that are measurable. So for example, for this specific goal, You'll have key results of the nature of maybe, join the local Toastmasters community to improve your stage presentation skills, right? That's one of the key results. It is not ambiguous from any angle, right? It's either done or not done. Similarly, you can have something like a certification. So complete English language certification from Ren and Martin. I'm just taking an example here. The certification can be completed or cannot be completed. There is no subjective assessment about it. So this way, you're trying to bring in measurability, objectivity to the entire goal setting process. And this applies to almost everything. It's not only about the, individual's career progression, skills enhancement, and so on. The same kind of philosophy of objectively measuring success or failure of your goals applies to team level objectives as well as company level goals as well. Right? Now, with that background in mind, let's quickly talk about the purpose of OKRs. Now, SMART, I'm not going to talk about specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound goals, because that's SMART is one term that's heavily been used for goal setting. Second point is important. No more set and forget, right? Typically, if you look at the traditional way of setting up goals, it used to happen at the beginning of the cycle, and people used to look at those goals only at the end of the year. That's not happening anymore. In the framework of Agile performance management, you're setting up goals preferably on a quarterly basis, on a quarterly frequency, and then you're tracking them almost every couple of weeks, if not every week. This is giving you the possibility to, mobilize the resources as and when needed, throw out the goals as and when you find that necessary, and set up something new whenever the need arises. So that is an important part of being agile. Alignment. Here, it's not only about an individual's performance management. You're trying to align the individual's performance with the team's performance, and then that in turn connected with the company's performance. This is going to help you, or rather help the individual contributors as well as the teams visualize the North Star. What is it that the organization is trying to achieve? Connected. Now, this is more in reference to the Jira ecosystem, or rather Atlassian ecosystem, or on a broader level, project management ecosystem. You can have objectives that are connected to key results, which are basically Jira tickets, Jira tasks, right? So for example, if increasing, let's say, customer retention is one of the objectives, and for that, you're going to implement a story. Obviously, you can connect that story, which is inside of Jira, as a key result inside of Appraise. What happens due to this connectivity is you get the line of sight visibility. So whenever you are working on a day-to-day activity, you are at the same time also looking at how this day-to-day activity is helping you achieve short or long-term goals. And finally, the transparency element is also an important purpose of OKRs. By default, or rather, if you go by the book, OKRs are meant to be public, right? As opposed to the traditional way of setting up goals where only the manager and their direct reports are aware of what goals have been set for the individual and so on. As opposed to that, OKRs are meant to be public so that everyone knows what everyone else is working on, what each one of the other teams are working on, and what is the overall North Star goal that the organization is trying to achieve. And finally, we are talking about forms. Forms is essentially, a reference to the traditional performance management. Now, when we are talking about agile performance management, we do not necessarily mean you have to completely discard the traditional way of doing performance management, which is, structured feedback, elaborate feedback, where feedback is gathered from multiple individuals. The process lasts for 1 month or so, depending on the size of your organization, and so on. What we are saying is take best of both the worlds. We are not necessarily saying traditional way was completely wrong and it cannot help out anymore. We are saying take best of both the worlds. Bring in some new things that are more in line with the expectation of the current workforce, and at the same time also bring in some of the traditionally successful ways of doing performance management. So that is where forms come in. Let's understand the purpose of forms. Now I want you to visualize this in the context of continuous feedback, right? The continuous feedback was supposed to be quick, short. Here it is supposed to be thought through and detailed. So it has to be structured, completely thought through. And we are not only talking about forward looking feedback, it also has to be backward looking as well. It has to be detailed and actionable. Now, the reason the third point says it has to be periodic is because this specific process takes a lot of time. Again, the complexity of the process, the time it takes is dependent on your organizational needs and cultures. But typically, the traditional performance management, or rather traditional performance reviews, not management. The traditional performance reviews are conducted periodically and they are triggered by typically the HR department. The process can last, like I said, from a few days to a few weeks. Performance review is the primary use case, but you can also have 360-degree feedback, managerial feedback, upwards feedback, and so on. Typically, in the traditional performance management system, there would be only the involvement of team member and managers when the performance management occurred. But here, we're also talking about the other stuff that happens. You also need to take into account different aspects of the employee experience to ensure other data is gathered that can help you come out with some objective decisions. Right? So in a nutshell, in very brief, we have talked about three important elements of agile performance management: continuous feedback, OKRs, and then forms. Now let's talk about why is Jira ideal for agile performance management. If you recall my first couple of pointers, you'll realize I had mentioned it's important to see agile performance management within the same light that you look at agile project management. These two cannot be separated because the performance management aspect needs to have some context. And then there is no better place than Jira to find context, because your team is working on their projects, on their day-to-day tasks in Jira day in, day out. Another important element is, if you are a software development organization, chances are majority of the organization is already utilizing Jira for their day-to-day project management. So in that case, obviously, since there is no separate system to adopt, adoption is rapid. And an important and interesting element, you're going to be able to connect the execution with strategy, right? So what's the execution part? The execution element is the Jira tickets, the Jira issues, the Jira stories, the Jira bugs that your team is working on. And what's strategy? The objectives and key results that have been set for the quarter, for the 6 months, and so on. So in a sense, you're trying to connect your day-to-day activities with your short-term and mid-term goals. So the bottom line is, don't mess up your team's routine workflow just to accommodate another tool. Find a solution that works well with your existing tool set. Now, obviously, given the flexibility that's offered by the Atlassian products, Jira, Confluence, you can definitely build something natively within Jira and Confluence. If you are a small team, you can build out an agile performance management system pretty easily. So coming to the next slide, obviously this is talking about Appraise for Jira. Appraise is seamlessly integrated with Jira, and it lets you manage goals, conduct frequent conversations, exchange frequent feedbacks amongst different stakeholders, and conduct traditional performance reviews as well. But like I was saying, if you are a small team with not so customized performance management needs, you can pretty much implement something simple natively with Jira and Confluence. I want to leave you with a couple of useful resources. The links will be available as well along with the presentation. There will be a future of work survey report that we conducted a couple of months ago. It was a global survey of 500 plus HR leaders. And then there is a book by Dr. Terry Horton, a workforce futurist. It's based on Future of Work Masterclass. With that, I'll leave you with the concept of agile performance management. Thank you very much.